Welcome to the Wander Mode podcast, where we celebrate the fearless spirit of women embracing life's wanderings. Where every story is a spark of inspiration and reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful moments happen when we simply embrace wherever the journey may lead. This podcast that you are about to listen to today, where I chat with Deb Blum, is going to really guide you on how to connect with your whole soul. And that might sound a little woo-woo-y, but I have to say, Deb navigated this conversation in such a way that even for me, where I feel like I am a very reflective person and I'm pretty in tune with my emotions and what I need to do to navigate things that I'm struggling with, it brought this awareness to me of basically that I am the key to completing this loop of when there is something heavy, when there are things that are not going great in life, I am the one who can heal that. And I don't have to look outside of myself for that healing. I don't have to have apologies from other people. I can rely on people and talk with people, but ultimately, I am the one who has the work to do. I am the one who needs to know myself in order to truly reclaim my full power because I know myself so completely. When you get to the part in this episode where Deb is guiding an experience of you putting your hand on your heart, I just invite you to participate with us during that part. Pull over on the side of the road. If you're sitting at your dining table, whatever, just hold the phone for a hot second and practice that with us because honestly, I did it during this podcast. And even though I was actively podcasting at the time, there were so many things that came up just from doing that little practice, and it's one that I have used a lot since. So I hope that you have some real tangible takeaways from this episode and that you too can really step into the woman that you want to be because you have met your whole soul for the first time. All right, Deb. We are going to jump in because we've already had what I felt like was actually a pretty good conversation before I clicked record. But thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
I really feel like you are a woman after my own heart. I have really been on this journey the last few years around energy work, and you are all about energy work and how we want to show up in life. And I want to start by you sharing what's your energy today.
My energy today? It's really a funny thing because it's so different than it would have been any other time before 3 years ago, because I would have just said to you, I'm great. Life is great. Things are great. And by the way, they are. My life is great. And I now can hold so much more. And the truth of the matter is that I actually have kind of a heavy heart today because my kids who are 20 and 22 were here this past week visiting. And it just gets kind of almost harder for them to leave. And maybe it's because I know that every time that they leave, we're kind of one step closer to that. I don't know how much they're going to be back. My 22-year-old has a girlfriend, and over the holidays this year, I know he's going to be with her for half the time and us half the time. And so it's always a little bit of that pang of, I hope I savored that enough. I hope I was present enough with them. I hope I really took it all in. And so my heart was kind of heavy when they left on Sunday night and Monday night. So I'm kind of feeling that a little bit today, just a little raw. Yeah.
Your kids aren't kids, like little kids anymore, but there's an energy I think that can be brought when you have individuals that are younger than yourselves in your space and you see life in a little bit of a different way just because you're spending time with different human beings. But my best friend is my daughter's godmother, and she has her over quite often for longer weekends and stuff. It's special time. And she always says that same thing that you're talking about, which is it just feels quiet. And I'm just kind of feeling sad today that she's not here anymore. And so it's so interesting that even at that age, that feeling still resonates. And I wish they were still here,
Yeah. And I also absolutely love and appreciate our quiet time, our alone time, and a quiet house and a clean house. I do. I appreciate not having to think about all the groceries and all the things I do. There's something about that, but it tugs at my heart, and it is quieter, and it is just like the energy shifts, and I can feel it, and it's really palpable. So that's kind of where I am today.
Well, I appreciate you taking the space to honor that feeling on this on this podcast, because as you said several years ago, you would have just said, "Oh, I'm great." So I'm curious then, if 3 years ago you would have just said, "Oh, like I'm great, everything's great." How has that changed how you parent now? If you're much more transparent, or I guess taking ownership of being in spaces that are other than just great.
I mean, it started many years ago for me. I remember a moment in time when my kids were pretty little. I mean, I'm thinking preschool age. And I was standing at the bottom of the hill that I lived on, and there were maybe like 6 women there, and everyone was talking. And I just had this moment that I felt inside of me that I was like, this is so frenetic. That's the word I said. And I have either got to leave here, like move, or I need to learn how to be in this energy and not get consumed by it. And that was like a moment in time when I started to realize that there was a lot more to my life than this doing all the time, this kind of frenetic pace, and also a little bit more missing in me or missing in my life. And I don't know why this is popping in my head. It's kind of a funny thing. I haven't thought about it that much, but I also, around the same time, someone said something to a friend who then told me that kind of pierced me, but it didn't make sense that it really pierced me. And she said, I can't trust Deb. This is what she told the friend. I can't trust Deb because she smiles all the time.
Oh, wow.
And it was kind of an interesting thing because it like pierced me. And on the one hand, I wanted to be kind of mad at her about it. But on the other hand, I knew she was speaking truth to some degree, that I wasn't in touch with all of me. I was in touch with the mask of having it all together and getting it all done and smiling while I did it and being the happy person who could handle anything, and I'm tough. And that's kind of how I was. And so I think at some level, I knew that I was more than that, but I had no clue how to get to it. And I was comfortable with all of that, though. Like that, my comfort was in being the tough one, being the one that smiled, the one that did not reveal myself to you. Other people felt that I was revealing myself to you, except for that woman. No one else was really
there's something going on here.
Right. She was really onto something. And, I feel like some days I think I want to go back to her and thank her. I never have, but, just to thank her, because it was a moment that kind of just like never left me fully. Like it was always there. And I'm still smiley and a happy person. It's not like that's stolen from me. It's just that I'm so much more than that. And that's not the only thing I can do, is be the smiley, happy, do it all, get it done kind of person. I'm so much more expansive than that. And all of us are, by the way. Like everyone is. Like, that's not a me thing. That's an us thing. Most of us got confined to a certain set of emotions that were comfortable for our family of origin, to a certain set of behaviors, to a certain set of ways of being to feel safe. And we kind of put ourselves into this little box of roles, rules, and responsibilities, and it's confining. And there's a point where we start to go, maybe there's something more. And what we usually do is go, oh, I need someone else to do more, or like my life needs to change. I need more outside of me. When really what I think we're all yearning for is just to connect to all of ourselves, all the parts that we had to disconnect from to survive our childhood, to survive life, to be following all the rules. And I think that's what we're being called towards. So I felt like I was really thankful that I had some pivotal moments that were like mini awakening, kind of like a breadcrumb that was like, you can either take this and gobble it up and then it'll bring you to the next one, or you can ignore it. And a lot of times we ignore them. I just happened to have taken them at that moment.
Well, yeah, it would have been so easy to have just been, in a way, defensive and just been like, oh, well, what's her problem? Like, she must be such a negative person if she can't want somebody else to be happy. But instead, you reflected upon it and thought, okay, well, is this actually who I am? Or am I putting on a bit of a front that somebody else is seeing through? And do I want to continue to keep that up? Or is there something else to be done? But that's also scary, because I think, especially especially habitually, we get used to, well, this is who I am and this is how everybody sees me. And what happens if I change? Is there going to be judgment with that? And so we can get a little lost in our head then with spinning wheels of like, even if I want to change, should I, could I, would I?
Totally. Yeah. And there's another piece to it too, which is the reason why we wear masks and we do the things we do are because it works for us. Like there's a reason unconsciously we employed those as strategies to be accepted. Like you said, like, so, it's like, I want people to like me. And I learned that like being grumpy and being whiny, because I was a very whiny little girl. So I learned that being whiny was just not okay. Like, don't be needy, don't be a burden, don't be whiny, and don't be lazy. I had a bunch of things like that. So I was like, I'm doing everything the opposite of that. No way am I going to be any of that. So they didn't just threaten my present day relationships. They really threatened the foundation of me, my safety, my survival. It was like, I do these things unconsciously to win the love and approval of other people and to stay safe. So I'm like, if I change those things, like who am I and what happens if I do any of this different? And I don't know if I was super conscious of it, but that's why it took me so freaking long. Because it took me so long to get here because I think I didn't understand it. And that's why I work with women now to help them to understand that what they're going through is very normal and know how to navigate all of those self-protection mechanisms that come up, all of the resistance that comes up, and navigate those things in a way so that you can feel safer to be your authentic self in the world. People tell people all the time to be authentic, but like, what the heck does that mean and how? Like how? Especially when the entire world is telling us, no, just keep yourself making other people comfortable and keep on coping best you can do.
So something that you said really, really resonated with me. I think sometimes we have to get back to our why behind why we have the mask in the first place. And you talked a little bit about being this whiny child, and that led to you deciding like, okay, I don't want to be that. I know that you do a lot with shadow work. Do shadows often come about because of things like that? Like whether it's childhood trauma or this perception of ourselves, perhaps, that we're given because of the way that we were raised or the expectations placed on us? Is that where some of the shadowy sides of ourselves come from?
So, shadow work is an interesting thing. And I think that if you talk to 10 people who say they do shadow work, they're going to all tell you something slightly different on how they interpret it. And I think that's perfectly okay. I tend to take a very gentle approach to shadow work. And I like to think of it as the me that I don't want you to see, right? Like the me that I might even know is a little bit true about me sometimes. Brene Brown says that we judge other people that are doing the same things as us, only a little bit worse. I always tell people I invite judgments because judgments are a wonderful way to find in us things about us that we were forced to cut off from and to abandon and betray and disown in order to be accepted by our parents or our family of origin. It can be our siblings. It can be our grandparents. It can be a teacher even. Gabor Mate talks about that we have two primary needs. Of course, we have more, but let's just look at the emotional needs as a child and their acceptance and authenticity. But we almost always have to sacrifice our authenticity to be accepted. Now, in an ideal world, we would know how to hold both with our children, but it's really it's quite a delicate balance. And I think that most children are going to learn that certain things aren't acceptable to mommy and daddy and that you have to be a certain way to be accepted. And then we have to go back and do this work later. So I don't want to pathologize it. I kind of think it's just part of growing up. I think it's part of being socialized. Our parents deeply desire that when we get to school or get around friends, that we'll be a person that people like. So there's some kinds of conditioning that I think we do have to do in order to fit into a society. And I think as we get older, we're more capable of looking at these characteristics. Like I think there's a common set of characteristics that we try to like train out of our children. Let's go through like disrespectful, mean, lazy, whiny, needy, being a burden, asking for too much. I mean, the list is long, right? Just thinking you're a prima donna. Don't be selfish and be kind. Be the kind of person who cares about other people. And when we go through that process of being conditioned, it's just kind of natural that there are going to be parts of ourselves that we just have to kind of put aside and we cut off from and we don't want to be. And the mistaken belief around shadow work is that what we're trying to do is sort of like become all of those things. And that's not true, but they typically start to torture us as we get older because our soul is kind of longing for wholeness. Our soul is longing to be known in its completeness and to no longer pretend and wear masks and be in that space of protecting parts of ourselves. And what happens is as we keep on saying to ourselves, don't be that, stop being so needy, or, why are you acting that way? Why did you say that to that person? Like, who are you? Why are you acting that way? Or when we lash out at our kids or anything, and we can't reconcile the person we think we are with these parts of us that kind of keep popping up. Debbie Ford is one of the teachers in this space who took like Carl Jung's work in shadow work and sort of made it more mainstream. And she talks about the concept of that. What happens is all of these parts of us that we are told that we can't be, that are not acceptable, think about them as beach balls. And you're trying to hold them underwater. But after a while, there are just too many and they just keep popping up. And they show up in our lives. Maybe we're not disrespectful to that person over there, but man, I'm disrespectful to myself. Or a lot of mothers will end up being like this person in the outside world where everybody reveres the way they are. They're so patient. They're so kind. They're so helpful. They're volunteering. They're always generous. And they seem so good with their children, but at home behind closed doors, they're a different person with their children. They can't believe that they could be so rude to their children and they can be so angry toward them. And so they can't reconcile these things. And what I think is these are beach balls. They're things that are human impulses that we all have. Everything's on a continuum. And so like no one is only respectful to other people, only respectful in the world, that no one is only that. No one is only having it all together. No one's only a doer that doesn't have any needs. Like we're all so complex and it could depend on so many things. And when we suppress those things in ourselves, when we basically beat ourselves up for being anything but those perfect things that mommy and daddy told us would make sure that we wouldn't get sent to our room and that we learned overtly and covertly, unconsciously, like be that way. When we start to accept that, oh my gosh, like a complete human honors and acknowledges that sometimes they do need to rest or that they sometimes actually are going to have to be disrespectful. And I want to talk about that in 1 second. They're going to have to sometimes have moments where they do things that another person might perceive as mean, even though they're not being mean. They're not intending to be mean. Another person might perceive them to be mean. And can we be lovable? Can we love ourselves even when we're not perfect in all those ways? And the fear is that we're not lovable because that's what we learned. It's not even necessarily true. I really believe our parents do love us with all of that, but we took that message away. Like maybe I'm not okay. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm never good enough. I have to keep trying to be more perfect and more respectful and more kind and more helpful and more never upsetting anyone around me. And we cannot stand it anymore. It's so against who we are because what we're really here to be is this full expression of who we are. And that full expression is multifaceted. So I could talk about the respect piece because I think that's one of the biggest ones that really gets people.
I would definitely be curious on your thoughts with that because I have a 4-year-old at home. And so we have a lot of conversations around this is a respectful way to say something, even though you're frustrated or whatever the thing is. But you're absolutely right. Like even when we have as parents the right intentions, you're still communicating a message. And like an example that I'll give is as our daughter's getting older and more capable, I'm trying to have her do more with like, you get your plate and your fork out, right? Okay, you want some water? Yep, you go get some water. My message in my mind to her is I want to raise a capable human being that knows that she can do things for herself. Yeah. But I can also see the opposite side of that, which is the message of, well, maybe I can only rely on myself.
Well, first, I'm going to pass on to you and your listener something that someone told me that was just really helpful, which is that moms try so hard to get it right. And he's like, but you know what's going to happen is it's going to be the one thing you had no idea that really upset your child that they're going to tell you. And you're going to be like, what? I thought it was all those other things. And to remember that really, we're not going to get it perfectly right. People misunderstand things all the time because we perceive it from our own lens. And so our children are going to perceive it however they perceive it. And you really don't actually have a lot of control over it. So I'm big on honoring whatever it is. like honoring kind of the multi-dimensional aspect of life. And even having a conversation being like, I really love to help you. I also want you to be really capable. So I just want you to know both are okay. And sometimes I'll help you, and sometimes I want you to be capable. But I always want you to know that this is a world that people are helpful, and sometimes you just got to do stuff on your own. And it's just both. I always like to say both on this too. I'm all about wholeness. Like it's both. It's like on the one hand, our children literally can understand way more than we can possibly imagine. And on the other hand, they literally cannot understand anything. And we have to explain it in so much depth. And it's both. And so we're holding that with them of just this honoring of treating them with the respect that we desire. And what we all didn't get, I think, from our parents is often a really good understanding of what it's like to be a human being. Just like what it's like to be a human, and honor and acknowledge that we have impulses to do things, but the impulse to do it doesn't necessarily mean we act on it, but we don't also have to shame ourselves for having an impulse. Like if a child has a toy in their hand and someone else pulls it out of their hand and their first impulse is to push that child down, I think it's worth honoring and acknowledging like, oh my goodness, like that impulse you had is totally normal. That is a normal impulse. And what we're learning to do is feel the impulse, and then we might have to choose something different, because the truth of the matter is that once you get to school, pushing a child isn't going to be okay anymore. It's not okay now, but you're going to feel it and we're going to work with it. And I just want you to know I'm here by your side working on it. How's that land for you?
The idea of the whole conversation definitely lands really well. I mean, I think being a former teacher, I have seen the whole spectrum of behaviors from 12 and 13-year-olds. I taught 7th grade in the heart of very high emotional turmoil sometimes. And I've seen the whole range. And I really like that idea of the conversation as a whole, that it can be both. You can be frustrated, and we need to start to work on communicating that in a different way. You know, it's mom can help you sometimes, and sometimes you need to do it on your own. And I like framing it that way, that it doesn't have to be this silent lesson that you're teaching. Like you can actually just say the lesson out loud. It doesn't have to be like quietly learned in the background. And in some ways, it gives her context for the why behind it. It's not just mom's just not going to help me, right? It's, oh, sometimes mom's going to help me and sometimes mom's not. And
it's mommy's job to, besides loving you up and making sure that you feel so safe and cared for, my other ultimate job is to make you into an independent woman who can live in this world. And I have both jobs. But so I do a little bit of each. And I'm always holding both. And you always have a soft place to fall. And I believe in you. But it's no different than really anything, like even the respect piece. Like I want to talk about the shadow of respect or disrespect along like a continuum, because that's really how shadows work. So on one end of a shadow would be that you are respectful to everyone. Okay. On the other end of the spectrum would be that you're never respectful to anyone. And I like this one because it's a little bit of like an extreme example. The problem is when you're looking at that spectrum, when you are respecting everyone, you're most likely disrespecting yourself. And when you're on the other extreme, you're probably caring mostly about what you think and want, and you're not respecting the other person. It's funny. I used to be a parent coach, and people would come to me and they'd be like, making a chart, and they're the rules of the house. You know, I'm like, okay, what's on the chart? The top one is respectful behavior. I'm like, okay. So then I say, well, what do you mean by respect? And they're like, you know, when I say something, then they do it. They speak to me with a respectful tone. And I'm like, okay, so you basically want them to obey. Is that what you're kind of saying? And they're like, kind of. And I'm like, okay, well, let's just call a spade a spade. Like, it's okay. We all do. Nobody doesn't want their kid to obey, right? It's like, that'd be a lot easier if our kids obeyed. But generally speaking, like what happens when a child is disrespectful is most of the time they have tried to communicate their perspective in respectful ways first, but they're like, no, I don't want to do that. And mommy and daddy are like, yes, you're doing it. And they're like, but I don't want to for this reason. And then mommy and daddy, it doesn't matter, you're still doing it. And then they lose it. And really what we're teaching them inadvertently is that your perspective actually doesn't much matter in this house. Like you got to do it my way. So therefore you must respect me, even if it means you stop respecting yourself and your own preferences and your own opinions. So it's hard though, because like when your kid isn't getting ready for school and you got 5 minutes before they get out on the bus and they're saying no, and you're just like, get the shoes on right now and get out the door. That's why I don't think we can say this is something like we can get perfectly. It's more like what I'd almost rather us do is have the conversations. Be like, you know what? This morning I realized that I wasn't able to honor your perspective because we were too busy and I was too caught up in meaning to get out the door. I just want you to know though, that I do want to kind of hear your perspective now that I'm able to hear it, and just know, like, what did I miss? What was happening that you felt so much resistance? And they might be like, Mommy, there was something in my shoe and I didn't know how to tell you. And it was too scary and I just didn't know what to say. And then it's, sorry. Like, and then we get to apologize. But my point is, that's what happens a gazillion times to us in life. And so then what we learn is we have to be respectful to other people, even if it means we have to betray ourselves. So we're not talking about becoming a disrespectful person. That's why I like this example, because the shadow is not about becoming mean, disrespectful, lazy, a burden, all of those things. I teach this in the program. What if you could just have a drop of it? Just one drop to balance you out. Like maybe if you're always a person who are always respectful and you don't respect yourself and you kind of don't have a backbone, you never stand up for yourself, maybe one drop would give you a backbone to be able to say, maybe I matter here too. Because that's all we're really saying, is that if we're not saying you matter more, you just start to matter a little. Mm-hmm. And then you maybe start to someday say, when I'm in a place where I'm making a decision, I want to make decisions where I can respect another person and also honor and respect myself. Mm-hmm. Because that's the ultimate thing. So when people think about shadow work, they're so often so afraid because they're going to go into this darkness. And there is that element of shadow, like our scarier feelings or like maybe our impulses that are like too hard to even acknowledge. But that's not where we start. You start at low hanging fruit. You start at the things that are torturing you. Mm-hmm. And you start to say, wait a second here. Can I start to come into greater acceptance that I am more than just this? I can be respectful and I can also honor my own needs and preferences, that I don't have to push myself away in favor of other people. And that's going to be scary for most of us because we learned as a child that this is our safety. This is our survival, is to be what other people need us to be. And if they're uncomfortable, it's going to be so uncomfortable inside of us. But the mistaken belief is that we're uncomfortable because of present day circumstances. That's not true. We're uncomfortable because of childhood circumstances when we were powerless and we had to do what mommy and daddy said. Mm-hmm. And because, as you said, power dynamic, mommy and daddy, they have power. We don't, we are powerless. But now that we're grown adults, we're not that way anymore, but we still feel like a child in that moment. When we do assert ourselves in a moment, I can promise you the person will give you pushback, partially just because they're going to not be used to it, partially because they're going to like having their way, partially because you're not going to do it skillfully. So they're going to know that you're unsteady with it energetically.
Yeah.
And they're going to push back and you're going to go, see, I shouldn't do it. That's why. You're going to feel their discomfort and it's going to be so unbearable for you. Mm-hmm. And that's why really the work is actually less in the actions at first. It's building from our inside out. Like, can I love myself even in the face of another person being disappointed in me? Can I stay with myself in this moment like I couldn't as a child and take a moment and be with me in this moment, soothe myself, stay present, and remember that I need to be the foundation. I need to be the one that's centered in me. That's why the work has to be in that inner fortification first, because we did not get that as children. It's a threat to our survival when we go outside of the things that we learned as children of how to survive and be successful in our family and then be successful in the world.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's safety in your family unit. I mean, it's for the same reason why when kids are really, really little, babies, early toddlers, it's that constant trying to seek out mom or whatever the safe parental figure is, because that is where safety is supposed to be. That is just innately in us to do or go where we need to go in order to be protected or be safe or be accepted, as you're saying. And that is a lot of deep work because, to your point, by the time we recognize that we have the shadows and that we can't keep pushing all the balls under the water, it all has to come up at some point. Have you found that there's a really common age in which that occurs for most people where we start to recognize or see these shadows? And is there a particular reason for that, whether it's life experience or it's just age or even developmentally, like we're even at a point where we can?
It's so great. I love that you're asking this question. I'll give you a couple of like short answers and then a little longer answers. So first of all, I do notice that for a lot of women, it's like kind of a little bit of like a midlife crisis or a midlife awakening. So somewhere maybe in our late 30s, a lot of women will start to experience that. But what I'm noticing is that people are experiencing it much younger. Maybe it's just because we're so exposed to TikTok and all these videos about emotional health and well-being and all of this. So what happens is we start to feel some sense of something's wrong. We're like restless, something feels missing. I still say what's missing is us in our own lives. We think it's like our husband. We think it's our job. And usually it's actually like better start here first because you could really disrupt a lot of things in your life if you don't start with yourself. So the answer that I think is important to acknowledge is I do think that there's some stuff that happens related to our safety. Like if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sometimes it has to do with like, have you gotten some of those fundamental needs met that enable you to then be able to feel safe enough to start to look at these things? But I even kind of argue that a little bit because I have some friends who don't have some of those fundamental needs met and they're massively in awakening times in their life. So maybe, maybe not, but probably to some degree, your physical safety is not a full-on threat in your life. You're living in somewhat of conditions that you know that you're going to get some food, you have some money, you have some housing. You're not in survival mode, full-on survival mode. But some people will get catalyzed into this work by being in survival mode too. So that can happen. There's also this other fascinating perspective that I think is so spot on, and I see it with me and with many other people. It's actually Carl Jung. So I've never studied Carl Jung in the sense that like I haven't just gone and studied his work, but I am so drawn to his work. I'm so Jungian in the way that I am in the world. I'm like about wholeness and shadows, and I love the conscious and the unconscious mind and all of that. But he talks about something that's called first and second half of life living. And first half of life living is actually the time that you're really responding to what does life want from me? And it's very egoic. And I don't mean egoic in the sense of like self-absorbed, but more in the sense of like we're survival based. We're very like primal. Get a job, make money, get food on the table, get a house, find a partner, procreate. It's very kind of biological and it's very much what is expected of us. And it's a lot of rules, roles, and responsibilities. It really is fundamentally in that time. Then what happens is if we're lucky, we start to feel that that is no longer fulfilling enough for us. Something is missing. That's the missing piece. Like, what's the missing piece? Well, really, it's that we're still oftentimes following like a prescribed way of being in the world that we've been socialized to live. So then when we have these moments where something feels off, that's when we oftentimes apply old ways of being toward this feeling. And we start going like, I don't know, I need another job or another man, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. But actually what we're being invited to is second half of life living, which is when we're leading from the place of like, what is my soul calling me toward? What's my soul want for me? And that's when we shift out of so much doing and achieving and productivity and checking the boxes off and making sure that we've accomplished all these things and so survival oriented into what do I actually desire? What did I have to leave behind? Who am I? A reclamation time. We are searching for more meaning and for more connection. And we want to open our hearts up again. Because a lot of times that first half, we had to shut our hearts down in order to like be in corporate America or to just be so fast and productive and to stay in that rat race. So then we shift into this next space, but there's a gap between the two. And that's why I tell people the whole soul way is the gap. It's the place where you go into that place. And I navigate you through this thing to become more soul led, to feel like we're living our lives true to ourselves. I mean, the number one regret of the dying is I did not live my life true to myself. I basically lived another person's life. I was dependent on the other people's validation and approval. I was doing what I thought I should do. And God, I mean, I don't want to regret that. I already don't. I already am living my life 85 to 90% true to myself. And it's available to all of us, but it does require some courage and some work. And it requires us to be willing to go inward and to find all of ourselves and all the ways that we were told to be and really say, wait a second, is this true for me? Is this really what I desire? Is this really how I feel? And find even the feelings we had to cut off from. Most of us don't have access to our full range of emotions because what we mostly do in life right now is try to avoid feeling the crappy, powerless, even just unloved, unseen feeling. We don't want to feel that way. So we kind of do everything, eating food to numb out, drinking, blaming, criticizing, changing, fixing, doing. And we're just trying to avoid feeling that. And honestly, aliveness comes from wholeness. It's a little harder to feel my feelings in the moment, but it's what makes me feel alive. And I think it's much harder to be living trying to avoid being our whole true selves. It's a lot more suffering, a lot more damage to other people. It's really a harder way to live.
And I would imagine too, in some ways, when you're not approaching it from a whole soul method, there are a lot more pitfalls that you are going to interpret as a solution. It seems like the easy solution. Like, I just need a different job. I just need to have one more kid. I just need to be in a different marriage with someone who gets it. Whatever that thing is. So when you don't go from a whole soul perspective or go inward to really evaluate that first, then those easy rip off the Band-Aid solutions seem like the right fix, but then you find yourself a few months later, a year later, still in the exact same position where you're like, well, so now what? I thought this was going to make me feel better, and then it doesn't. But it's because you haven't actually even done the work or began to uncover the layers that should have been done prior to making whatever big decision you made to pivot, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's right. Because wherever we go, there we are. That's the truth. Wherever we go, there we are. I was really lucky because I remember my husband and I were in a massive crisis point, and I was a thread away from leaving. And we were in therapy only because it was a crisis, because he was not interested in going. And I remember sitting outside of the therapy office waiting for him to show up in my car. And it hadn't even occurred to me anything about a concept of a midlife crisis, but I Googled midlife crisis. And the first thing that comes up says, do nothing, take no major action, don't get a divorce, don't buy a sports car, don't change your job, do nothing. And this is way long ago, like when I was not in touch with any of this stuff. And I was like, okay. And it felt like really good advice just to kind of go, that sounds very reasonable. Even though every part of my body was so restless for change, every part of me was like, no, I need a divorce. I need to go get a job doing something I really want. And I might even have to move somewhere. Like, I just needed to do it. And I was so glad that I read that because it grounded me just enough to keep me from making drastic changes. But I also say we're all just learning and growing. And it's okay if you've made 18 drastic changes thinking that that was going to be the answer. And it took you 18 times to finally figure out that wherever I go, there I am. That's okay. We're all learning in our own ways. But when you do figure it out, it's like the beginning of magic. It's the beginning of things just really opening up for us. And those 18 things that you did were also part of your path too. They make us who we are right now. So there's no harm in that. Here's the thing. When we start to do this work and we start to realize that it's really like an internal journey and that we're really looking to find our whole selves, it is quite liberating and it is quite amazing that we can do that and we have that opportunity and that we are that kind of a being that we can actually learn how to not be controlled by our reactive fear mind. We can learn how to be in the presence of our thinking mind. We can learn how to regulate our nervous system. That's amazing that we can do that. But here is the worst thing. Is the person who doesn't even hear the call or doesn't get the call or doesn't want to acknowledge the call, because the one who did the 18 things, at least they're still like taking risks and doing things and like creating their life for themselves. Like I say, kind of like more power to you. The worst though is that what happens to most of us is that we don't really want to hear it. We kind of hear it. We feel that unhappiness inside of us, but we just want to suppress it. And inadvertently, what happens when we don't go to second half of life living is that we just start to shrink our lives. And it's accidental. It just happens because all we want to do is feel safe. And I heard this guy, I wish I could give him credit, but he talks about the difference between being primal or powerful. What a great contrast, right? Primal or powerful. And if we are not choosing to be powerful, which means noticing that fear and then saying, how can I build up enough strength inside of me to choose something else? Powerful is amazing. Primal is going to always keep us small. And really, it comes from being little children. We have to grow ourselves up and mature ourselves and really come into wholeness, into a healed self. And that's why I am so focused on inner child work, because I believe that with inner child and shadow work, what we do is we find these parts of ourselves that are still immature, and we come in as the mama. And we hold on to that little part of us and we grow ourselves up so we're strong enough that we don't have to act from our childhood patterns anymore. We can choose how we show up in the world, and we can choose to come from this place of this healed, whole place by just being with ourselves. Frankly, just turning toward ourselves and bearing witness to the child that never got what she needed. We pick up where our parents left off and we do the things for ourselves that we most needed as children. And then we become emotionally mature and spiritually whole women instead of wounded little children trying to be in relationships, trying to be mommies, trying to be business people, trying to be leaders. And it's refreshing because that stuff just sucks the life out of us. So I want everyone to feel fully alive and vibrant and exhilarated by life. And the only way to do that is actually to turn inward first and to recollect ourselves, to restore ourselves to wholeness. And the sooner we do it, the more amazing our life can be.
And obviously, the practice of going inside and being is so much bigger. It was something you and I talked about before the podcast, which is a lot of this is an overarching practice. It's something that you learn to do over time, that it's so easy to say, go meditate or go do yoga or do more journaling or whatever, but it's all a practice. It's all learning how to do it in a way that you're getting back from it. So do you have like an exercise in terms of getting yourself to be still for even just long enough? Like, you may not be able to do all the work, but even just a little bit of work, or like just have a moment where you start to get that feeling enough that it's a feeling you want to continue to seek instead of the frantic energy and the going, and the self-sacrificing.
Right. Because what you're saying there is, to some degree, all of us are a little bit like, at a minimum, accustomed to, and maybe in an extreme form addicted to, the busyness and the frenetic pace. Like, we're just kind of like, it's so present. And then, by the way, not only that, it's so normalized. Yeah. And in fact, if we're not that busy person, we judge ourselves. Oh my God, why am I so lazy? She's so productive. Maybe I should volunteer more. Maybe I should do more. Maybe I should, the holidays are coming up. Oh my God, maybe I should go to every party. Maybe I should have a party. And it just gets so out of control, right? If we can go back to something I said before, which is that very few things have a reaction in us that is actually rooted in what thing is happening out there. Like, it's almost always from our childhood. And when we can accept that, we actually will naturally start to want to nurture ourselves. But it's actually a journey to come into that. So I invite people to just try it on first. Try on the possibility that, like, you feeling upset in this moment because that person said a thing in that way. I'm not saying that that person isn't also a jerk, but your reaction to it is still your reaction. And your reaction is the beautiful thing that you get to look at, because you can't control what the other person does. You can try, but for the most part, you can't. So all you can have control over is your reaction. There are two things I'm going to do for exercises. The first one is just to imagine that when you look at the other person's behavior and you get focused on them, it's just because you don't want to feel your hurt. Now, you might still say, but I'm feeling my hurt. I'm angry. I'm like, that was like obnoxious. I'm feeling all kinds of hurt. But that's like storyline hurt. That's like, he did a thing and now I'm a victim and I'm hurt. But underneath that, there's like a little baby, like you can put in your hand and be like, oh, what if you could just have hurt feelings and didn't have to justify them? What we always learn is that we have to justify our feelings. We have to make a case for why. You're not justified just by like, I just feel sad and hurt. Just like, no. You have to blame the other person. You have to make a case for it. But your feeling gives a tremendous amount of information, because however we perceive that is probably much more connected to that when we were children. That's how we perceived circumstances. Mm-hmm. So if you can, the minute that you notice, shoot, I'm blaming because I don't want to feel my feelings. I'm blaming because it's easier to project out into the world than it is to own my own experience. And we want them to own our experience too, right? We want them to soothe us and make us feel better and tell us that they're sorry and that they were so bad. What if instead we could just be with ourselves for a moment and give ourselves a thing that we didn't get? So what I teach everyone in my program, and if you listen to other podcasts, you'll probably even hear me talk about this, is something so simple and yet so hard to remember. And it's something you can do anywhere, anytime, in a board meeting with your tantruming child, while you're driving down the street, before you go to bed, while you're on the toilet. It doesn't matter. It doesn't take any extra time. And it's taking your dominant hand and putting it on your heart. Now, some people will say they prefer to have it on their belly. I don't care where you put it. Somewhere where it feels like you're giving yourself a little attention. It could be arms around you. Some people put their hands on their cheeks. You can follow whatever works for you. But I like the hand to the heart because it's so simple and you can keep driving. So if you put your hand on your heart, and just take a moment, like just picture right now, like you're angry and you're frustrated and that person just hurt your feelings. And you go, God, I have a lot of feelings right now. That's the first thing maybe, right? And then it's just like hand to heart, take a breath. You can close your eyes if you're able to, or you don't have to because you can be driving. You could be in a board meeting and you just simply say something like this. I'm here. I'm listening. I've got you. Something like that. It could be, I feel you. It could be, I love you. It could be, you're not alone. But you just say whatever it is. I don't care. Make it up. It doesn't, even if you don't feel it, you're just sort of like telling it to yourself. But imagine that your dominant hand is the loving parent and your heart is your inner child, the child that needed that when you were little. And all you're doing is just taking a moment to say, you're not alone. You've been navigating this all alone. I'm so sorry. I didn't even know. The only thing I knew was to blame another person. I didn't even realize that you've just been sitting here wanting me. You've been wanting my attention all this time. Holy smoke. How come it took me till 50 years old to figure out that I could make myself feel better? And it's that simple. And it can happen 100 times a day, one time a month. It doesn't matter. But I want you to notice, like even with you, just if we took a moment right now, just if we just pause for a second and you just said to yourself something, just either out loud or quietly to yourself, just notice if it feels any different for you.
What's interesting to me is the second I moved my hand to my heart, and this was probably, I don't know, like a minute or two ago, but even before I closed my eyes and took a pause, like I still have my hand on my heart. There's something very grounding about it. Like it almost makes you feel like you're being touched by another human being, even though it's your own hand. Like
Yes.
I like instantly felt very not alone, even though I didn't even feel alone.
Totally.
That's very interesting.
Yes, because you are genuinely connecting to yourself. And there's actually some research on this too that talks about touch and that talks about like oxytocin release. There's even stuff around how it is a regulating thing to do. And we don't even think of doing it because it kind of feels a little weird. We're trained that the touch that we get is from another person, or that like nurturance and reassurance should come from someone else. And we don't really fully understand that we have it within us. That doesn't mean that we don't want it from other people. I don't think we were made such that we cannot be okay if we're alone. There are a lot of single people in this world. We must be able to nurture ourselves. And also, we can't put all those needs onto our partners or our children or onto our friends. And the other thing that we learn is that when we do this for ourselves and we start to love ourselves more, the world starts to reflect it for us. Instead of us coming at people with that kind of like needy or graspy energy, we start to come to people a little more whole, and they're just like so happy to be there for us in a new way. It's quite beautiful to watch how things change.
That's a little bit of where my mind went mentally. Like I already subconsciously knew what I needed. And so then it brought about, I don't want to say the solution because I feel like that kind of simplifies it, but it brings a conclusion in some ways faster to whatever that feeling is, because you subconsciously already know what it is that you need, versus when you're waiting for somebody else to figure that out, like apologize, feel bad, change their behavior. That could take a long time. If ever. And so then you sit with that feeling longer too, versus when all of a sudden I did that, I could see how in a state of high emotion, you're instantly with what you need. I don't really actually need them to resolve this for me. Like I can resolve this for myself. Like,
Yes.
am I tracking?
Yes. And I want you to think about this. It's actually a healing moment. You're almost like completing a loop.
Yes.
From childhood, you're completing a loop that didn't get completed by the parent who wasn't able to see you in that moment. And you're right. There's a subconscious place in you that knows like what you need. And you don't even have to have the words. It could just happen just by being like, I'm here with you. Ooh, like something happened and it closed the loop. And it is, these are micro healing moments. And I invite people to not always do this in the heightened moments because it's like anything. Like, if you're like flying a plane, they teach you a million times how to land a plane with all different circumstances so that if you're in a bad circumstance, you already have like this groove in your brain. I invite people to practice putting your hand on your heart when you're in a regulated state and tell yourself, I'm here, I'm with you, I love you, you're not alone. Literally every time you think of it, you're driving down the street, oh, you're stop at a stoplight. You might even have like a rubric in your head that's like, every time I stop at a stoplight, I'm going to put my hand on my heart and I'm going to tell myself I'm here and I'm listening, I'm with me. What happens is then when the crisis happens, you might even just automatically put your hand on your heart. That might regulate you just enough to be able to say, I'm here, I'm with you. You're kind of like almost not fully, but you're trying to get yourself there. And years and years ago, we had a family member who lived near us and we reached out to her and we asked her to come over for dinner on Friday night. That was probably like, let's just say that was on like a Tuesday or something like that. And I didn't hear back from her. And long story short, basically, we didn't have the greatest relationship. And there had been some things that happened that caused me to go into a spiral of, did I do something to upset her? Why isn't she responding right away? That was that night. Then the next day, she still wasn't responding. And then I'm like, oh my God, I'm really spinning here. I'm really spinning. And I was like out of control, like kind of like couldn't even be present with my children. I was so caught up in fear that I was in trouble and something bad had happened. And so finally, the night that she was supposed to come, that we still hadn't heard from her, I'm putting my son to bed and I get into bed and I'm just like, well, I can't continue this way. This is like, I am suffering in such a massive way. Well, I had heard about the hand to the heart thing, but I never tried it and I thought it was ridiculous. But for some reason, it's what popped into my head. So I was like, okay, we're going to try it. So I put my hand to my heart and I said, you're okay. We're okay. That's another thing you can say to yourself, by the way. We're okay. Like, even if she doesn't like us, we're going to be okay. Even if she's mad at me, I'm going to be okay. I think I'm going to be okay. And all these things poured out of me. My whole nervous system changed. I was like, I'm okay. Like legitimately, I felt okay. I got up out of bed, was no longer focused on it. I felt completely okay. 2 days later, I get a message from her and she's like, sorry, was off the grid, was out camping, just got back, been gone for a week. I ruined 5 days of my life. I literally stole 5 days of my life because I just spun out of control. And if there's the thing that I think the people tell me the most that they learn in my programs is how to reclaim so much time and energy that was spent ruminating, overthinking, perseverating, worrying, just distracted, not present. And I tell you, that was a like changing moment. And think about it like this. Everyone's got a plug. What most of us do is we take the plug and we're constantly looking to plug into other people. And we're just like, we need their love. I'm not going to be okay if I don't have their love, if I don't have their approval, if I don't have their acceptance, permission, whatever. And what we start to do is we take our plug and we tether ourselves internally by plugging back into ourselves. And we realize, holy crap, I'm the best resource I've got. I am literally the better resource. Like you said, I know what I need. I know how to do it. And the thing I can promise you, if you really do the work and you really do actually tether yourself internally and become the source of the love, approval, and validation you're seeking in the outside world, it will get reflected. People are right now treating you the way you treat you. Maybe sometimes better because they're people pleasers, but they're probably not treating you worse than you treat yourself. If you're really honest with yourself, they're probably not treating you worse than you treat yourself. And they might be treating you a little bit better. Imagine if you took a breath and felt like so congruent and so yummy and delicious inside, and other people could feel that and they just like met you there. It's so available to us, but it's not available by just continuing to try to seek for it outside. At some point, we just have to say, this is my work to do. It's my work.
It's interesting because I consider myself, especially now in my maybe like 39-year-old, 40, 41-year-old self to be, to be fairly thoughtful about who I am and what energy I want to put out into the world. And it's why a lot of the changes in my life have really come about in the last few years. But I can tell you right now, even though I've done, I would say, a lot of soul work and I've thought through a lot of feelings and things, I will say none of it has really come back to the answers are in myself. And like that I can truly fix 100% of that or alter 100% of that or control 100% of that. It's still, there's still a little bit of this like idea of who am I blaming? You know, some of it's myself, some of it's other people, some of it's circumstances, some of it's childhood stuff, some of it's religious stuff, some of it's whatever. But what I realized when I put my hand on my heart is that I am still letting a lot of limiting beliefs control me. Limiting beliefs of like needing to prove something, needing to prove that I can be a successful entrepreneur because I can't accept failure. Well, then that draws in the question, why can't I accept failure? Like, what is it that's telling me that I have to just keep going, 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 going? Why do I not think that I can earn money for myself out of something that I created? Like, here I am thinking I'm doing this great job of controlling my limiting beliefs when in fact, like, I haven't even scratched the surface.
You know, here's the thing. Like, again, I go back to yes, and because what you have to do first is be aware of them. But when it comes to something like a limiting belief, what we often try to do is, well, I don't ever want to speak out loud that I have money issues, because if I do, I'm kind of telling the universe that I have money issues. So you're going to hate what I'm going to tell you. And your audience needs to do is you got to lean in. When we find these things, usually what we find is some resistance. Like, I don't want to be that way. I don't want to have this limiting belief. I don't want to feel that way. Like, I want to make money. But to get there, we just first have to allow it to teach us. And so we allow it to teach us by just being like, oh, money issues. What are you here to tell me? Like, I thank you so much for showing up, because the only way I'm ever going to get through this is if you teach me. So what's going on? Like, come on, join the party. Money issues, like name it, whatever it is, like money limits. You are trying to keep me safe. I don't know why, but I want to know, and maybe it's even things like, where do you feel it in your body? Like, might be like a breath and just like, holy smokes, I feel it in my shoulder. What is going on in my shoulder? Maybe you don't ever have shoulder pain, but all of a sudden you're like, I have raging shoulder pain. So maybe it's a hand on your shoulder and it's that moment of like, oh, you're in my shoulder. Thank you. I appreciate you so much for showing up here. Like, I am so glad, because if I don't ever look at you, you're just going to continue to try to get my attention and you're going to sabotage my life. So I am letting you in. You're going to be my friend. And it's that kind of a moment of just like, yeah, I'm right there with you. You might then notice like you're with it and all of a sudden it changes. And all of a sudden now you're like, oh, it's my hip. Or maybe it stays your shoulder. And maybe now for the next 3 weeks, you've got shoulder pain. And you're like, bring it on. Because the resistance is what's really limiting us. It's not the actual belief. It's the resistance to really knowing what the belief is. And I have to tell you, I had to let go of the whole thing of like, that if I speak it, that it's going to happen. You got to let go of that, because, it's torture.
Yes. I feel like so many people out there, as they're talking about all these money manifestations, they're like, you have to be so careful with the words that you're saying and you're putting out there, because now you're putting it out into the universe. And so I've been like, nope, I don't really think that. Nope. Not going to say that out loud. But to your point, like, man, that consumes so much energy to keep that down.
You're literally denying truth. You're denying truth. And I mean, kind of a fan of like a little bit of fake it till you make it. I'm not like opposed to that concept, but we manifest who we be. I don't know that it's our words as much. Now, I'm not saying that our words aren't important, but far better that our words are congruent with who we be. So then we get to like, let it move through us, because keep in mind, everything we don't let move through us becomes a block. It becomes an energetic block in us. It gets blocked in our shoulder, or it gets blocked somewhere. And then that means our life force isn't flowing freely. I just believe in truth. I believe in that you're everything. I believe in that you are money blocks and you are not money blocks. You're both. So let's just like expand that to be, I am all of it. And I want to have an honest relationship with money. What don't I know about money? Because there might be things you learned about money pre-verbally in the womb, prior lifetimes, ancestors. And you're kind of saying, yeah, I don't have any of those issues, but somewhere in your lineage you do. And so it's like, bring it on, sister. Like money is my friend. And the minute that you befriend money and you're no longer kind of like resisting money in its wholeness, meaning like money in its greed, money in what does money represent? Oh, greed. Oh, not enough. I want money and I'm also scared of money. I want money and I'm afraid it's going to make me greedy. I want money, but I'm afraid I'm taking from other people. I want money, but I'm afraid of what it might do to my child if we have too much money. I want money, but what if I have so much money that I don't manage it and I lose it all? What if I have so much money, get really big bills, and then I no longer can afford to pay anything because I stopped making as much money and now I can't have that life anymore? God, like the things. So let's just let them all be there and be like, it's both. It's like, oh, you're all welcome. I want everyone's arms to get so much bigger and just be like, every part of me is welcome.
We demonize some of these things like greed or hate or whatever. But to your point, if again, you come back to this idea of the whole soul, then you also have to accept that in being all things, that you're also going to feel the whole range of all things, which means that it's love and it's hate, and it's being cost conscious, and it's being greedy, and it's being selfless but selfish. In order to be a whole person, you have to acknowledge that that feeling is human. In speaking the truth, I just feel like, how do you end a conversation like this? So the only way I can even do it is, Deb, if this resonated with someone who is listening, where can they find you to start chatting with you, working with you, etc.?
Well, the easiest place to find me and everything is my website, which is thewholesoulway.com. If you want to find me on social media, I am most active on Facebook, and you can friend me. It's actually Deb Blum, Durkee, and you could find me there. But if you go to my website, you can actually go to a place up in the right-hand corner. It says free stuff, and you can actually get my shadow work starter kit there, which somebody might be interested in, kind of learning more about the shadow. There's other things too. There's Unshakable You. There's a guided meditation. I'm on Insight Timer as well. And if you go there and download it, obviously, then you'll get on my email list. And so for people who do like to get emails, that's a great place. And I email somewhat frequently, so you stay connected. And always, of course, reach out, DM me, email me, whatever works for you.
Thank you so much, Deb.
Thank you. I got to tell you, it's so fun. I love podcasts where we really just get into it and we're authentic and we're not scripted, because it's just so much more real and fun and deep. And I loved that you were so eager to go deep on this.
Thanks for wandering with me today. If you were inspired by this episode and think it would ignite a spark in a friend, don't hesitate to share. And if you're craving more from the Wander Mode community, hop on over to Instagram at WanderModeCo. Meet you in the next episode, and until then, wander on.